Hello and welcome to Mystic Ventures Podcast. So, I got some good news tonight. Anton's back.
Oh, yeah.
And we got the technical difficulties figured out. So, we're ready to rock and roll here. We're going to be talking about something a little bit different than what we've usually been talking about. So, Anton, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Oh, we are going to be talking about the Nephilim, or the Nephilim, sometimes as they are referred to as. The common consensus is basically they're either fallen angels that breeded with humans and they're their offspring and all that. And sometimes they're referred to as the sons of God, the fathers, I guess, of the women they bred with and all that.
So, the sons of God, that's kind of ambiguous. Because, I mean, what is the sons of God? Is that like angels? Is it?
I've heard some iterations where they were either known as the fallen ones, as referring to fallen in death, or warriors of great renown, or killed or slain is basically what it's trying to refer to when it says sons of God. It's not really the sons of God.
Because I believe that the actual Hebrew word translates to the fallen ones, is from what I've been researching. The actual word Nephilim.
Well, what I've been researching, it says that they're fallen in death, kind of like I guess kind of like the warriors of the Book of Maccabees. You know about that, the Ghost Army and all that. They're kind of like a subtle hint to that, basically.
So, I guess the first mention of the Nephilim, or the Nephilim, however you want to pronounce it, is in Genesis 6, verse 4. And I'm not sure exactly which translation this is.
I actually have the MT text, which would be the King James Version and the NIV version. When the people began to multiply on the faces of the ground, and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all they had chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh, their days shall be numbered, 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward were sons of God. When to the daughters of humans who bore children to them, these were the heroes of old, the warriors of renown.
So I thought the interesting part of that verse is when it specifies that men's days shall be numbered 120 years. So is that indicating that the Nephilim actually lived longer than that? You know, because I kind of insert that in there.
Well, some of the books of older Canaanite and Judaism kind of refer to Gilgamesh, which actually, he was almost basically an immortal, basically. He almost lived for I'm not too sure on this, maybe 300 or 400 years, somewhere around there, like a good amount, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty sure that would indicate that they do live longer than regular humans.
I mean, even it said, Adam lived, 930 years, Methuselah lived 969 years, Lamech lived 777 years, Enoch lived 430 years, which, well, technically God took him up, and he basically never died, but...
So, basically, the sons of God, which I don't know if you refer that as the Watchers, or what you would refer to them as, basically saw that the women were fair and took them as wives as they pleased.
They were basically... some translations say they were sons of God, some say they were angels, some say they were watchers. It's all up for debate, really. It depends on what canon you believe, really.
And that wasn't favorable in God's eyes, I'm guessing. But after that, I guess, so it mentions Nephilim in Genesis 6, verse 4, But then I guess they aren't mentioned until the book of Numbers, when
Well, they're also mentioned in Ezekiel too, as a kind of a subtle hint type of thing, as
Yeah.
in fallen in death type of thing.
I want to get to that afterwards, but when they're mentioned in Numbers, actually, it's when Moses and the Jewish people escaped slavery in Egypt, and they were given the Ten Commandments, and then they wandered the desert for 40
And they were
years.
looking for the promised land.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were looking at Canaan, and they sent spies there, and I guess the spies came back and said they described seeing Nephilim, and the way they described it is they seemed like grasshoppers compared to them. So there's a misconception there that the Nephilim actually didn't live past the flood. Well, that contradicts that theory, because in the book of Numbers they were there when Moses and
I want to know how they survived the flood, is what I'd like to know. How did they, like, survive the flood? Was, like, Noah was, like, kind of like a half-breed, where he had, like, some DNA of Nephilim in him, or maybe they were on boats, like, at the time? I mean, it's possible, I guess.
Maybe, like it was earlier, the sons of God decided to lay down with women again, human women. So, don't mind my dog in the background. He's a yelper. But, anyways, what you were saying is how they're mentioned in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 32, verse 27. Now, the Septuagint text directly mentions Nephilim, while the Masoretic text does not. So I get the Masoretic text is considered canon, right?
Masoretic text is a older version of, like, King James and the NIV, basically.
Yeah.
Is what it is. The Septuagint is a surviving older text of the Pentateuch, basically.
I guess the main difference is that in the Septuagint text in that verse is that the Septuagint text says that the descendants of one of Noah's sons who died in battle uncircumcised do lie with the fallen warriors in Sheol,
Sheol, yeah.
while the Masoretic text says they do not. So they directly contradict each other there, and I guess the Sheol is like fallen warriors, Jewish fallen warriors.
Sheol is kind of a place, kind of like Hades or Tartarus, or even Elysium or Valhalla, kind of a place for, like, dead demigods and angels. Even Gehenna is referred to in the Newer Testament as a place for fallen and dead angels, basically.
Yeah, that's why I kind of thought maybe there was a connection to Valhalla and Viking mythology, because that sounds a lot like Valhalla. You know, like they got to die honorably in battle and they go to Valhalla.
And then some say they got to be circumcised to go to Sheol, and some say, oh, you don't need to be circumcised, you just got to be with God or something like that, you know. It's kind of yes, no, maybe so type of answer, basically, is what we're getting.
So if I'm guessing correctly, the Septuagint text is slightly older, and it's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Is that the main difference there?
Let me check my notes.
Because I know the Masoretic text is what the King James Version is translated from.
The Septuagint is actually 3 to 2 CE, while the Masoretic text is 7 to 10 CE. So the Septuagint's fairly older, which is why there's such a differentiation between the two, is because it's an older text, and it has more in line with older Jewish Canaanite kind of beliefs. Because the Canaanites kind of had, like, more of a god type of complex, where they had different gods, and they believed that, there's a name for it. It's called,
Multiple gods, yeah, I know what you're saying there.
Monotree. Or Malana-tree or something like that, basically, where you believe in one true god, but you believe in all the other gods.
Sort of like demigods.
No, they believe, like, other nations and stuff are other gods.
Have
like,
their own gods.
Yeah, like every nation has their own god and all that. That's basically what they believe.
So, the Septuagint text, that has a lot of the other books that were kind of thrown out, right?
That would be the Dead Sea Scrolls. Has a lot of the old books that were thrown out. The Septuagint, I think, is mostly part of the Pentateuch. Is mostly the parts where it derives from. Mostly the Old Testament, basically, is where the Septuagint comes from.
So speaking of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's where a lot of more references to the Nephilim.
Yeah, you get the Book of Giants, Enoch, all that. You get the Book of Thomas, Judas, all that.
So the weird thing is actually 40% of the Dead Sea Scrolls are actually biblical. They're actually in the Bible that we see today.
Or they're referred to in the Bible.
Yeah.
Matthew actually refers to the Book of Enoch, which is really interesting.
And the Book of Enoch describes Nephilim to be the descendants of Watchers, or angels and female humans.
Yeah.
It's all kind of similar as you go down the road.
I mean, Watchers, they're not really the same thing, but they actually kind of are. They're basically angels, but they're basically another level of angels. Like, the Watchers are higher than, like, a normal angel. They're basically, like, watchers of the earth, kind of protectors, guardians, if you will, of the earth, and all that.
And I know we were talking about it a couple podcasts ago, but we did talk about Goliath maybe being a descendant of the Nephilim.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what you're seeing in all these massive bones that you're seeing today. That maybe they're just descendants of Nephilim from thousands of years ago.
Well, if you look up American giant burial mounds, there's a bunch of evidence to prove that they're giants. Now, whether that evidence is truthful or not depends on your beliefs or what you actually think of it. I mean, there's really no hard evidence of giants, but you could look at it that way. You could look at it like, oh, there's evidence for this and this and this.
I mean, we live in such a vast world, and there's really desolate, deserted areas that a lot of people don't go to, and cave systems, and just different places in the middle of the wilderness that we haven't explored, like millions and millions of acres.
Yeah.
Just places that people wouldn't regularly go. So it would make sense that if they are alive, they'd be hiding out somewhere that people don't really go.
I personally think if there are some alive, there's very few of them.
Yeah, I mean,
there's not a significant sum of them left.
It's probably not a common occurrence, especially these things are probably going to be like 12, 13, 14, 15 foot tall.
Yeah. Actually, in the MT text versus the Septuagint, Goliath is portrayed to be taller than what he actually is. In the MT text, he would be 8 foot tall, versus the LXX or the Septuagint text, he would be about 6 foot, I guess 3, because of translation rate, they actually use cubics. They don't use feet or inches like we do now. They use cubits.
Obviously, yeah, they don't use the same measurement systems that we use in today's society, so that could be a little bit lost in translation over thousands of years. Yeah. I mean, it would only make sense. But,
I mean, it's generally the same consistence, though, basically. It's the same kind of thought that, yeah, they're unnormably tall, you know? They're not average height, basically.
Imagine, though, being a warrior back in the day, like, you're going into the promised land and you're one of those spies and you go out and you see this 12, 13, 14 foot creature, like, or this human, I guess, humanoid. I mean, I don't know how human they look versus beast-like, but, I mean, either way, it's going to be terrifying.
Well, imagine if you're like a little, like, fucking 7-year-old farmer. You're like a little farmer's kid, you know, you're wrangling up your sheep, and you just see a giant fucking walking across the field. That would scare the shit out of you, wouldn't you think?
I mean, it would certainly be an intimidating thing, which it also makes it more perplexing that Moses and the Jewish people were able to actually take over Canaan and defeat these things. So I'm guessing they were all killed in battle.
Yeah.
Or
most of them were slain or exiled or hidden or ran away or something.
And then according to Ezekiel 32:27, if you want to believe that, they passed down to Sheol. So after they were slain in battle. that to me, that little nugget of information about the Nephilim makes it all that more impressive, and all that more like, yeah, they needed God's help to be able to defeat these freaking 12, 13, 14, 15 foot giants in battle, just like David defeated Goliath. There's got to be some sort of divine intervention there.
Yeah. There's no way a bunch of old freaking... I guess some of them may have been younger, like teenagers and stuff, but you're not going to beat a fucking, 8 foot, 12 foot giant, even if it is somewhere around there. They're fucking huge.
And I mean, even having the courage to go into battle after wandering the desert for 40 years and fight these giant Nephilim creatures, that would be insane to me. So, as far as Nephilim giants living in today's world, I mean, how possible do you see that?
I'd say it's a fair possibility. I mean, who knows? There were pterodactyls still recent in 1806 found.
Yeah, I mean, there's been crazier discoveries. They're discovering new species of sea creatures deep down in the ocean every day.
Yeah, so there's places we haven't explored yet, so we haven't conquered all of Earth yet,
I was reading something how there's thousands and thousands of new mammals discovered every year that we've never seen before.
Well, most of them are textual variants, basically, which they're the same species, basically, but they just have a different mutation to them.
Right. There was actually a video of this giant squid that they didn't even know existed, and its tentacles were hundreds of feet long. It was crazy. This submersible submarine that went down hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of feet down to the bottom of the ocean discovered that. So, I mean, that thing's huge.
Oh, yeah, and I think I heard about that, and that our climate, it's kind of changing its migration patterns and stuff.
So maybe it's moving closer and closer up to the top of the ocean level.
Yeah.
Who knows? I did want to talk about one story that I thought was really kind of correlated to the whole talk of Nephilim and giants in general. Yeah. So, Special Forces Attacked was the name of the video I watched by Mr. Ballin on YouTube. If you want the whole story behind it, go to him because he describes it really good, and he's a really good storyteller. But basically, in the mountain ranges of Kandahar in 2002, an infantry unit was on patrol in the Kandahar mountain range, and they seemingly vanished, so they were just gone. And basically, the army sent in a group of elite special forces, the Green Berets, which these are at the top of the food chain in the military. These guys are Navy SEAL levels. They're extremely well trained. So they go out looking, I think it was 4 or 5 days they were out in this mountain range just searching. And eventually they found military equipment on the ground, pieces of uniforms and broken bones just scattered. And there was basically a trail of it that led to this giant cave. So they walked to the entrance of the cave and they kind of seen a flash of movement. So they kind of aimed their rifles or whatever, what the heck is that? And when they did that, a giant spear hurled into a soldier named Dan and basically killed him instantly. And they all started shooting, and this giant 12 to 15 foot tall beast man comes running out, and he had this really long red beard they described, really long red hair. And they all just say, shoot it in the head, shoot it in the head, and they all just fire this thing. And these guys got Barrett 50 cals, they're just blowing this thing to smithereens. Took 30 seconds of shooting this thing for it to finally go down. But so what ended up happening was they killed the giant. Dan was dead, unfortunately, and they had 2 helicopters come and retrieve the fallen soldier and the beast. They basically loaded it up in this helicopter, and they went back to base or whatever. And every time something like this happens, you have to make a report. And they made their reports, they got to be truthful about it. And then they were forced to redact their report and change it for obvious reasons. But I guess it was also a little detail is it had 6 fingers and 6 toes, which I thought was kind of interesting. Little like if you're gonna lie about something, and just add that into there.
See, that's kind of like a Bigfoot thing. You know, where, what would we call it? The Yowie kind of had, like, different number. They had, like, 3 fingers, was it?
Something like that.
Yeah, they had
you said.
some kind of finger deformity that was different from ours. I wonder if that's, like, an inbred mutation, maybe? Or it could possibly be, like, just a genetic difference between species.
Maybe the Nephilim just always had 6 fingers and 6 toes from the inbreeding between the sons of God and humans. So you never know. It's all speculation to a certain point. But obviously they made them redact the report. And this guy was like a Green Beret, and he's telling this story, and there's multiple reports of it. And why does this guy gotta lie? And if he did lie, he's a hell of a storyteller, that's for sure. But yeah, he was in this massive cave in Kandahar in the middle of Afghanistan, and that goes back to my earlier point that if these creatures do exist, it would make sense that they'd be in some desolate mountain range cave system that nobody's ever explored.
It'd make more sense for them to be there than anywhere else, basically.
And
is what my thinking is.
I mean, that's the one, Kandahar, Afghanistan. That's like a really desolate place that you'd really, if that's where you're going to search for something like this, that's where it would be. Now, was that the last one that walked the earth? Who knows? And that was only back in 2002. Yeah. So that was 20 years ago. So that was not that long ago. So,
see, what I found interesting about the sons of God, the somewhat fathers, I guess, of the Nephilim would be that if you look at the actual Hebrew or Aramaic, depending on what translation you're looking at, the definition is Ben Elohim, which is basically gods or gods, lowercase. And it's kind of interesting that in Genesis 3:05, it says something along the lines of, "You will be as gods," which is translated as Ben Elohim, which is the same basically as what we read before of the sons of God, translated the same way. Basically the same number. Which I thought that was kind of interesting. So is that to say that that like Adam and Eve became as of the sons of God type of thing,
Yeah, like I said before, I mean, when they say sons of God, it's rather ambiguous because you'd think humans are also God's creation, so they're God's children. Yeah. So it doesn't really specify, like, sons of God. Is that angels? Is that watchers? Is that so?
We'll go back to an earlier point. The other translation could also transfer the fallen ones or the slain ones, which I found pretty interesting. Because if the Bible says you will be like of as gods, it says you will be fallen in death, which I thought was pretty interesting. So does that mean, is that the reason why like Adam and Eve died? Was because they were the slain when they took the fruit and it kind of poisoned their mind and killed them or something like that, Wonder if that has any correlation between them or anything like that.
Wasn't there, there was a theory on then Nephilim or something being the descendants of Cain. What was that all about? I thought I read something about that.
As to my knowledges of the Bible, I don't believe that Cain's descendants are alive at all. Because in the genealogy of all the way to Noah, there's no inbreeding with Cain's. It's basically somewhat inbreeding from somewhere else. So, and it's after the flood, which I thought was pretty interesting. So, does that mean, like, when it says the world, does it mean, the whole world? Or does it mean their world type of thing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting theory. Like, how did these Nephilim survive the flood in the first place? So, but they are mentioned afterwards in the Bible, so.
Actually, there's also another mention of their children, which are called Azarites, I believe, something like that. Something with an A. And they're basically descendants of the Nephilim, basically.
So I know I did have a theory earlier that Sasquatch were somehow descendants of Nephilim, but the more I'm delving into the research of Nephilim, I'm kind of closing that door, more and slowly closing that door, because these things sound more like human-like than ape-like creatures.
Yeah.
So I'm beginning to kind of veer away from
I wonder
that
if
theory.
they could have went feral, though. They could have went feral, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, but or maybe they just did look like Sasquatch, that we see. Maybe
we never really talked to a Sasquatch. How do we know they don't have their own form of language,
I know the description of whatever that thing was in Kandahar that killed those that infantry was definitely not really the description of a Sasquatch. I know that. But, there's a lot to look into when it comes to these things, and that's why you do more research and you form your theories. And if your opinion isn't evolving, then, in my opinion, you're not doing the research behind it. Because your opinions and your theories on things are always going to change the more information that you have. Because you don't have enough information to begin with to conclude anything unless it's a concrete scientific fact. This is what it is.
That kind of reminds me of Plato's Allegory of the Caves, where it's a story about how these three men live in like this kind of cave in the middle of nowhere, and they gotta watch this kind of like crude puppet show and stuff. And one decides to go out and leave, and he sees this beautiful world up above, and then he kind of goes back into the cave, and he kind of tells them what he experienced and all this beauty and wonder of all these flowers and stuff, and they just like kind of laugh at him, and they're like, "Oh, there's no such thing as flowers. What? You're crazy.
Yeah.
There's no water. Water doesn't run. It's still. Water doesn't run." That's kind of the type of thinking I think people should steer away from, is kind of the closed-minded thinking.
Yeah, and here's a theory I have for you. What if we are in our own separate dimension from other things that can travel in between dimensions, and these things that we're seeing can actually travel from dimension to dimension, like these Sasquatch and these UFOs, and maybe that's why we can't get a lock on them. That's why we can't track them down, because we can only. And that's the same with the paranormal. When we see them, they enter our dimension, and then they leave our dimension.
Well, that does kind of tie into the spiritual world and all that. Where, like, there's a different plane that's kind of subset going into our own,
It would explain a lot of ways. I know for some people that is an unscientific and an easy explanation. Oh, you just got to throw all that out there just so you don't have to do the science behind it and figure out what it actually is. So you're just going to say, oh, other dimensions. But it really does make a lot of sense. I was listening to a podcast kind of going back to the paranormal, and this guy was talking about how things would go missing in his house. And when he was a kid, he'd just have scissors sitting there on the floor, and he had a lot of paranormal activity in his house. But he'd set these scissors down, and all of a sudden, they'd disappear. And they wouldn't be there. And a week later or so, he'd find it again on the microwave. They just disappear and then reappear. So they're almost like going into some other dimension and then returning.
So maybe it's some kind of universal conversion happening there, where it's kind of like they're all going into one type of deal.
I don't know, but it's intriguing to me. It's interesting, and that would, for one, be awesome if that were actually the case. There's a whole entire other dimensions out there that we don't even know about, and there's these whole separate universes and all that. That's more the direction I'm going towards the more I'm learning about all this crazier stuff, because it does make a lot of sense for that to be the case.
Yeah. And a lot of Gnostic belief kind of believes in that too a little bit, where it believes that there's like 7 heavens, there's like 7 Sheols and 7 Gehennas and all that stuff, and it's more like a dimension is type of like people kind of integrating together in some sort of way. I don't know if I misheard them or I misinterpreted what the book was saying, but to me it kind of sounded like different people can create kind of like their own little safe haven, I'll say, or something like that, basically.
Yeah.
And the ancient Canaanites or nomads or Jews, I guess, would be the technical term for them, but they all kind of believed in some sort of a type of energy with people that they can like come together and create kind of like their own energy. And they kind of describe that as what would heaven be. Heaven's a kind of more of a train of thought than it would be an actual place type of thing, you know what I'm trying to say?
Less physical and more
it's more of a state of mind type of thing, where it's like if a bunch of people got together and they created like a free thought, open-minded type of...
So if somehow everybody's consciousness is linked together.
Yeah, and they all kind of like, you know, have good thoughts about each other, it's going to be good, you know. But if people get together and they get all rowdy and they get all angry, it's a type of form of hell, is what some Gnostic texts say. But
I do really believe that your psyche and your mood and your energy, you excrete that out into the universe, and it affects your surroundings. Because if you're ever around somebody, it's not just if somebody's angry and they're depressed and you're around them, you can feel it like vibrating off of them. You can feel that negative energy, and it usually makes you feel bad too. You don't want to be around an angry, upset, just a really depressed human being, because then those emotions are kind of casted onto you, and you start to feel that. So,
or it could be preconceived notions too. Like, if you know, like, there's a bum in the alley and you think he's kind of sketchy, you're going to feel kind of unsafe. Yeah. And you're just going to be putting out those vibes, you know.
But the same thing is, if you're around a really vibrant, a really positive person, those vibes are going to be cast onto you, and you're going to want to more gravitate towards that type of feeling. And the reason I was going more towards the interdimensional stuff is when I was at Edinburgh Manor, and I talked about it in a couple episodes ago, but when that thing touched me, it had to have been in some other dimension, right? Because I couldn't see it. I got burnt on my neck. I got scratched on my neck. Like, where was that coming from?
I still believe today that was a succubus. I believe that was a succubus trying to seduce you.
Now, I used to joke more around about the succubus and the incubus stuff, but I was listening to this podcast, and this guy was talking about how he was basically, he didn't say raped because he was like, I think 13 or 14 years old, just that kind of point when he was hitting puberty. Yeah. And he would feel this presence come over him and, in essence, ride him and have sexual intercourse with him. And he could feel it as if it was almost physical. Like, he could feel the breasts on it, and it felt like... And when he looked back on it, he's like, yeah, that's what that was. That was sex. That's what sexual intercourse felt like. Like, this was a real thing having sex with me. And he said it kind of screwed up his mind and his sexual... It really messed him up mentally and sexually, and he had these perverse ideas and fallen into really bad habits and addictions and stuff like that because of it later on. So I don't really joke around it as much because I do think it is a real thing, and same with the incubus.
Yeah.
But because that does happen, and I've listened to plenty of podcasts of people talking about it, and these people don't have any reason to lie. The guy said, he's like, I didn't tell anybody until my girlfriend like 20 years later. So he's like, you really got to trust somebody to open up to them and talk about this stuff, because most people discount it and call you crazy, and that's really hurtful when you have something that happened to you and you weren't there with somebody else to see it. So you keep questioning yourself, am I crazy? Did I really see that? Did that really happen to me? And that's kind of how I felt with the whole Edinburgh Manor thing, because I know I was with people and they kind of experienced similar to what I experienced. Like, they heard the footsteps and they seen the scratches, so I kind of felt a little better about it, because I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. Andrew's seen these scratches on my neck. They heard these footsteps, they experienced it together. So it's a little bit easier when you experience something like that with somebody else, because that's a shared experience. You'll always be able to talk to somebody about it. And a lot of these people lock it up, and they think they're crazy, and they never talk about these things. But I mean, they do happen, and if you want to discount all of these different things, from the paranormal, the demonic, people seeing Sasquatch, people seeing UFOs. There's so much to this world that we do not understand. There's a mystical side to this, not just this world, this whole entire universe, a whole entire stratosphere of information that we can't even begin to comprehend, and we are not even close to knowing all the answers. Not even close. We haven't even explored our entire Earth. Didn't I read something like that 40% of the Earth is undiscovered?
Yeah, something like that.
I think it might have even be higher. Like, not even our own Earth, let alone...
57 or something like that?
I can't remember what number it is.
I know our oceans are more or less undiscovered and all that.
And people claim to have all the answers. Well, we haven't even discovered our own world, our own Earth. We haven't discovered that. So maybe start with that before saying we know all the answers about the universe and different dimensions and all of that. I mean, you got to be pretty arrogant to actually believe that.
I mean, it's interesting to read about these older religions, because some of these older religions, they kind of are going through the same thing as we are. You know, with like ghosts and, you know, different creatures and animals and stuff like that. They're kind of relating to us on some kind of, I'd say, existential level type of thing. You know?
And not even at the religious level, but just at a cultural level. Like, they explain seeing the same things in every single culture. I'm pretty sure there's mentions of aliens in pretty much every single historical culture that there is. Like, every single one. So, and talk of the paranormal and talk of afterlife. So, I mean, you can say what you want and just say, oh, human beings as a whole are just superstitious creatures, which maybe we are, but I think superstition can come with a lot of truth as well. I mean, I think the whole entire term of superstition is throwing out the idea that you don't buy into it and these people are basically crazy.
I think all religions nowadays are some form of cargo cult. You know what a cargo cult is?
I know what a cult is, not sure what a cargo cult is.
A cargo cult is basically what happened in like South America and when we were fighting the war with Japan, and we set up all these technological advances with these natives, and these natives perceived our technology as divine.
Yeah.
Like our radio towers. They even have like rituals where they like use, you know, when they land the planes and stuff, they do all the fancy dance.
Yeah, I
they
get
do
what you're
that,
talking about.
Yeah.
I could see how more of a, what would you say, the third world country, these people that don't really have the technology could kind of see stuff like that as being supernatural too.
And I think that has a lot to do with what the ancients believed in. I think what they wrote down isn't necessarily wrong, but what I believe is what they actually practiced and how they dealt with it wasn't necessarily the best way. But that's just me and my opinion on it.
So, I think we're steering more towards the idea of some sort of advanced technology, some sort of an advanced intelligence out there that's beyond our Earth and maybe even our universe. So,
yeah, that's what I was kind of alluding to. Kind of like they're beyond our knowledge. Whether they're demons, gods, succubus, Bigfoot, they're kind of all the same. They're outside of our known knowledge. Like, we can't scientifically prove they exist. That's what's so great about the unknown, or mysteries, in my opinion, is because you never know what actually happened and what the truth is.
And I think this starts to prelude to what our next episode is going to be about. And I think we're going to steer more towards the extraterrestrial UFOs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Because that stuff just blows my mind out of the water. Because there's so much stuff on UFOs. More so than even Sasquatch.
Did you hear that the CIA unclassified certain documents this year about UFOs and
I know that the Pentagon released an actual video of a UFO.
yeah,
That
yeah.
baffled experts, just baffled everybody. Like, this is some sort of technology. It's a fact. This is a technology that we don't know about and that is way greater than ours.
And did you know when the pilots were kind of like, going after them, figuring out what the hell is that thing?
Yeah.
Their time, like, they, like, skipped time. Like, they slowed down. Like, they didn't know what happened. Like, next thing they know, it's like 30 minutes later and the UFO's gone.
Yeah. This is a technology that is so far beyond us that we're not even close to scratching the surface of it. Like, the United States thinks their military and everything, their fancy helicopters and fighter jets are so advanced, these things blow them out of the water infinitely. These things are so infinitely far ahead of us that it's ridiculous. And the cool thing about that is it's a fact. It is technology that is way beyond us. Like, fact. That even experts are like, yeah, this is a technology that's beyond us. This is a video of some sort of technology that is way above us.
No, it's just fog and mist.
Yeah, it's just some sort of, there's some sort of climate.
Well, do you know that for sure? Well, no. Well, then it's the same camp. It's a two-way street,
I'm sure the pilots would be able to tell you. They've flown in terrible weather and stuff like that. These professional pilots have flown in everything. I'm pretty sure they're going to be able to tell you if it was some sort of weird climate happening or weird phenomena, And I wanted to save this for next episode, but the Phoenix Lights, there was a giant UFO over the whole entire city of Phoenix, and thousands of people have seen it. And this is how gullible people are. The majority of people went on the news and saying, oh, this was just a testing for the Air Force was doing some test or whatever. And they're like, oh, okay, we believe you. Because people want an easy answer that's not beyond their
They don't
understanding.
like to challenge themselves when figuring out with people. They don't like to think about things that, you have to think about it critically. They don't like critical thinking, is what I'm thinking people don't like anymore.
Exactly, and that's the problem that we run into. But that's what this podcast is all about, is being open-minded and thinking critically and doing the research behind it, admitting when we're wrong, and then trying to learn new things. So, but before we get too far into the whole entire UFO extraterrestrial, we're going to have to end this episode. But if you want to listen to that, we'll be back next Saturday night to discuss UFO, extraterrestrial, and all that good stuff. So that's it for this episode of Mystic Ventures Podcast. Signing off.